Hello, this Science and Sport video is part of playlists relating to BTEC Sport and Exercise Sciences, Unit 2, Functional Anatomy. In particular, we're looking at learning AIM E, which is all about the muscular system, and again, specifically E1 incorporates muscle types, but this is the third, so this is part 3 video, which looks at the different types of muscle fibers that we have. So the specification identifies 3 types of muscle fiber that you will need to understand, the structure of and the functions of. And again, all anatomy connects structure and function, how something is built related to the job it is supposed to do. We're also going to look at how we might recruit these different types of muscle fibers at different levels of intensity. So which fibers do you recruit or call upon to work when you're doing something quite light intensity, so maybe jogging, or something when you're doing it at a very high intensity, maybe sprinting. Okay. Now, when we look at our muscles, they're actually incredibly clever because we call upon them to do different jobs for us. Sometimes we want one big off explosive, powerful contraction. Sometimes we want a series of powerful contractions. For example, when we are sprinting, the intensity is high and we want it to be repeated as many times as we can, sustaining high levels of force. If I go back to this one, we want maximal force one time as we throw the javelin. Sprint, we want multiple high force contractions, hoping that we don't fatigue or tire before we get to the finish line. And actually, sometimes we want less powerful contractions, but more prolonged contractions. So we don't just want to go for 10 seconds or 20 seconds. We want to go for a couple of hours, repeatedly asking our muscles to work without getting tired. And then we've got multi-event competitions. So we've got athletes who take part in 7 events over 2 days, or sometimes 10 events over 2 days. And those events are actually quite varied in the demands that we ask from our muscles. We've got some sprint, some throw, some jump, those high intensity, either high intensity one-off, high intensity multiple contractions, or they've got more endurance events as well. So these athletes need to be able to do a range of different types of contractions with their muscles. So we've just looked at events where we ask our muscles to work in different ways. They've got different functions. So sometimes the primary function is power, sometimes it's endurance. And of course that relates to lots of different sporting examples. So the information I intend to give in this video will continue to talk about the job we want our fibers to do, but we're also going to look at how these different fibers that we have in our muscles are structured differently to enable them to work that way. What is it in a muscle fiber that enables it to go on for a long time without fatiguing, to give aerobic function, aerobic performance? Or what is it that makes it better anaerobically? So what this table also does is provide columns for each of the 3 different types of muscle fiber. Now your specification calls these type 1, or at A level we used to teach them as being slow oxidative. There's massive clue in the name there. The other extreme is type 2X, or fast glycolytic, again a bit of a clue in the name. And the in-between fibers are called type 2A, or fast oxidative glycolytic. Sometimes I abbreviate that to FOG. So we've got type 1, type 2A, type X, 2X. So I'm actually going to present quite a lot of visual information in this video, and what I really recommend is that you pause, take in the information. I'm going to talk fairly briefly through them, but do pause the video and take time to absorb what you see. So we've already talked about different athletes working in different ways and needing different things from their muscle fibers. We've already recognized again that there are different types of muscle fiber. Type 1, slow oxidative, type 2A, FOG, fast oxidative glycolytic, and type 2X, fast glycolytic, your fast twitch fibers. Here we've got examples, they're obviously colour related as well in this graph, but we've got examples of our endurance athlete having predominantly slow or type 1 fibre. We've got our sprinter having predominantly fast, so if we combine the fast type A and fast type X, They have got predominantly fast twitch fibres with some slow oxidative or type 1 fibres. We've got our average person having a bit of a mix, bit more of a mix, again fairly even between slow and fast fibres. We've got our middle distance runner, so the more we go this way, the more they've got slow oxidative. The more we go this way, the more they've got fast glycolytic, and that's dependent on the event they take part in. Similarly, but perhaps in tabular form, we've got information about the percentage of each type of fibre different athletes might have. So we've looked typically at our streams, our endurance athletes having a high percentage or high proportion of type 1 fibres and having less type 2. Type 2X in particular, or we've looked at our sprinters having more type 2X for power and less type 1. Again, you will find, I'm sure, somewhere proportions that are related to your particular sport. You might find games players, footballers, netballers, hockey players, rugby players might have more of a mix because often those sports require them to have explosive bursts where you need power and force and to sprint, and might need to endure 18, 19 minutes of a game. So not only are the fibres functionally different, they are structurally different, and one way they vary is their diameter, how large they are, how round they are. The diagrams on the right here sort of show the difference in diameter. So in these cross-sectional views, you can see these slow oxidative or these type 1 fibres are quite small. There's lots of them packed in there. These are slightly larger, so these are our type 2X or fast glycolytic fibres, and they have more protein, more myofilaments packing in them. They are effectively thicker. So the diameter of fibres is one indication of structurally how they're different. This again, this left-hand diagram shows a single slow oxidative or type 1 fibre, and this shows a thicker type 2X fast glycolytic fibre. I'm just going to show you a couple of different diagrams. It's often similar information, but you might recognize and appreciate one more than the other. So again, stop the video to check them out in more detail. So here we can see a cross section. The darker coloring in fibers often indicates a redness again. So these are our slow oxidative or type 1 fibers. The redness we'll talk about in a moment. These are our larger type 2X fast glycolytic fibers, and there's a bit more information down there. Proportionally, we've recognized that if you're into endurance, you'll have more of the redder, slow oxidative fibers and less of the whiter or pinkish, fast glycolytic type 2X fibers. The more sprint orientated you are as an eventist, the more type 2X, the less type 1. And again, if you're middle distance, you might find you have more of a blend, and you'd certainly have more fog or fast oxidative glycolytic type 2A fibers. So this would be your type 1, lots of type 1. This would be your lots of type 2X. This would be your lots of type 2A. The redness I talked about, so in the colouring often you see slow oxidative type 1 fibres as being darker or reddish, and that's because they rely on mitochondria, myoglobin, things that enable them to use oxygen to make energy. We will learn about that much later, but that affects the colouring, the redness of them. They need blood supply and they have lots of myoglobin which stores oxygen and lots of mitochondria which uses oxygen to make energy. Conversely, those fibers and those muscles that have more type 2X, you can see that they look whiter in color because they have less oxygen use, less mitochondria, less myoglobin, less blood supply. This is just a very quick diagram illustrating a slow oxidative fiber or type 1 fiber and the capillaries that are surrounding it to deliver blood. Slow oxidative fibers rely on oxygen supply. They need oxygen to work because they work aerobically. So the slow oxidative type 1 fibers make energy and contract by using oxygen. The other two types of fibers, particularly the type 2X, they will use anaerobic sources of energy. They do not use oxygen. So type 2X just works anaerobically. Type 1, slow oxidative, works aerobically, needs oxygen. And that connects to the fuel that they use to make energy. We know from our sporting examples that different muscle fibers can generate bigger or smaller forces. So hopefully you know that your soleus is one of your calf muscles, your gastrocnemius and your soleus are your two calf muscles. What this has done, this has measured the force that those fibers have produced. So the type 1 fibers of the calf, of the soleus muscle, only generated very small force, or a low value here in watts. The type 2A, so the fog fibers, generated a much larger force. Okay, so type 2X generate the biggest force, type 2A is the medium force, and type 1 is the smallest of the force productions. So functionally, what we also want to understand is not only how much force can these fibers produce, but how long can they sustain these contractions for? What's the duration of the contraction? And what we've got is two diagrams really that convey the same message. So slow oxidative fibers, or your type 1 fibers, don't necessarily contract of a very high force, but you can see hopefully here they sustain the contraction. They can maintain a contraction for a slightly longer time. So their duration is higher, but the speed of the contraction, how quickly they contract, is slower. Hence the name slow oxidative, slow twitch. The fast glycolytic fibers, or your type 2A and X, they respond very quickly. So they can contract very quickly and generate big forces, but they lose that contraction very quickly too. So they can contract very quickly, but can't sustain the contraction very far, and it shows it here. So fast contraction, losing it very quickly. So this is a very simplified slide that shows the fatigability of the different types of fibers, how slowly or how quickly they become tired, how quickly they fatigue. So our type 1 slow oxidative fibers, are slow twitch fibers, which we know our endurance athletes rely upon, they are very slow to fatigue. They do not fatigue very much. They have a low fatigue rate. In contrast, our sprinters, who rely upon our type 2X powerful, fast glycolytic muscle fibers, they have a high fatigue rate. They can sprint for a bit, but then they get tired. In the middle then we have our fog fibers, our fast oxidative glycolytic fibers, our type 2A. Now these have a moderate fatigue rate, so they don't tire as quickly as the fast glycolytic ones. They don't endure as long as the slow oxidative ones. They're somewhere in the middle there. So it might be your middle distance runners. And that's because they have the ability not only to work like a type 2 fiber anaerobically, they also have some capacity to work aerobically, hence the other name, fast oxidative glycolytic. So they can use oxygen to make energy as well as working anaerobically. So the next couple of slides look at recruitment of muscle fibers, how we invite our different types of muscle fibers to help us generate forces. Obviously at rest, you can see here we're not inviting any fibers to work, our muscles are not contracting. If we then start to move in any way and we just need a low force production by our muscles, we would recruit our type 1 fibers. Our brain would send impulses to our slow oxidative fibers, and they are only able to generate small forces. If we need to do something where we're working a little bit harder, so we need to generate a moderate force, not only would we ask our type 1 fibers to work, but we'd ask our type 2A, our fog fibers, fast oxidative glycolytic fibers. Overall then we'd generate a slightly bigger force. If we then needed to get near or higher forces or maximal force, we would invite all three types of muscle fibers to do their best to help us out, particularly these type 2, well, they've labeled them type 2B here, but your specification calls them type 2X fibers, are fast glycolytic fibers. They're the ones that really generate big forces. This diagram actually, this graph actually illustrates the same principle but in a slightly different way. So when we want to have light muscular force, it's just the slow twitch or slow oxidative type 1 fibers that are recruited. If we want to generate moderate forces, we would generate our slow twitch, our type 1, and some of our fast twitch, our type 2A fibers. If we wanted to generate maximal forces, our slow twitch helping out as much as they can, we get our type 2A helping out as much as they can, and again we would then recruit our type 2X, our fast twitch fibers, to really generate big forces. And it really just explains it in text on the left here. The lower the intensity, it's more likely to be slow oxidative fibers. The higher the intensity, then we invite our fog, then we invite our fast glycolytic fibers to help us out. So we do look at motor units a little bit later in, I think, the next video anyway, but I just want to introduce them here. So I've talked about muscle fibers individually so far and the different types of fibers we have. But what you need to understand is that muscle fibers don't work individually at all. They actually work in groups, and the special group of fibers is called a motor unit. So what you can see here is a single nerve, a nerve cell, and it then divides into lots of nerve endings or nerve branches. Each one of these nerve endings connects to a muscle fiber. So this here is a single nerve connecting to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 individual muscle fibers. Now that is called a motor unit. It's defined as being the nerve cell and the fibers it controls. That's a motor unit. So it could be that these fibers were all slow oxidative or type 1 fibers, and this would therefore be called a slow oxidative motor unit. If we were going to be walking or jogging, we would recruit these motor units to help us generate small forces to enable us to do that task. It could be that these fibers were all type 2X fast glycolytic fibers, and this motor unit would be a fast glycolytic motor unit, and we'd recruit this one to work if we wanted to generate a big force in muscles. However, any single muscle can be made up of a mixture of the types of motor units, and it will probably be made up of lots of motor units. One muscle is not just one motor unit. So here we've got the spinal cord, we've got a purple motor unit connecting to the purple fibers. We've got a blue nerve connecting to the blue muscle fibers. We've got a red nerve connecting to the red muscle fibers. So this diagram actually shows 3 motor units in the same muscle. Now, if I wanted this bicep to generate a very small force, I might only recruit motor unit 1. If I wanted it to generate a big force, I was lifting a heavy dumbbell, I might recruit all 3 motor units. So I don't have to use all the motor units in any muscle at any time. So this is the last diagram to show you really, and just follows on from the previous explanation of the previous slide. So if we had a slow oxidative or type 1 motor unit, you can see that we have a nerve cell coming from the spinal cord going to some small, narrow, slow oxidative fibers. And if an impulse came down this nerve cell, all those fibers it connected to would contract. And we know already that we recruit slow oxidative motor units when we only want small forces or early in our activity. If we want to generate a slightly bigger force, we recruit our type 2A, our fog motor units. And you can see again another nerve cell going to different, slightly bigger, slightly larger motor units. These would be our fast oxidative glycolytic fibers, so they can generate slightly more force. If we wanted to generate a bigger force, so maximal force, we would also recruit our type 2X. Remember, B is the same as type 2X fibres. So an impulse would come down here, which connects to all these big, thick, strong, powerful flask glycolytic fibres, and we would generate a big force. Okay, so it's the same principle, slightly different way of showing it. So I actually presented a lot of information for you in this video already, and this slide is the final slide, and it tries to summarize both the functional and the structural characteristics of each of the three types of fibers. Now you will need to take your time with this, you will need to absorb this, you might need to regurgitate this and put this in a form that you can really understand. Again, what I would recommend if you can is to learn these characteristics. So if you were going to analyze any of the fibers, you might want to question what is it like in terms of these criteria. Does it have a high aerobic capacity? Well, I know that slow oxidative does because they work aerobically, and I know that fast glycolytic or type 2X doesn't because they work anaerobically, and I know that FOG generally is yes a bit, moderate. So these are the criteria which I really recommend you try to get your head around and learn so that you can compare and analyze the three different types of fibers. Similarly, these are the structural characteristics or the things that you might judge the fibers on in terms of their structure. And again, if you can understand these and know where each of the three fibers sits in relation to these, that's a great way of understanding and of learning these different fiber types. Sometimes questions ask you specifically about structure, so if you answered with any of this functional information, it would be wrong. Sometimes they might ask about the function of the certain fibers, and again, if you answered with the structural elements, it might be wrong. Sometimes it asks you to connect structure to function. How are they built to do their particular job? Okay, so you need to be very cautious about structure and function.